Hey guys, welcome back. The Jordan Rich Show here, coming to you live across the nation on WBZ and WCCO. And do we have a great guest in the studio? Not only because she's written a book that'll blow you away, but boy, she and I have been chatting before coming on the air. We have a lot in common. She's an actress. She's been involved in the arts and theater, television, movies, and she's the writer of a inspiring and incredible story called The Whip that we'll talk about. It's a novel. But Karen Kondazian is here. Hello, Karen.
Hello, how are you?
I say here because this is Old Home Week. You grew up in the Newton area?
I was born in Newton.
Born in Newton.
Yes.
And then, of course, you live in L.A. now. But
I do.
You come back here and it's like, hey, the old neighborhood.
Oh, my God. Well, unfortunately, I left when I was 1.
But, well, you have memories as a child, I know. But it is for being, we were talking about you being Armenian. This is the Armenian capital here, Watertown, Newton, all that area.
Yes,
and it's a beautiful area. So, and you told me there's a street named after you.
Yes, Kondazian Avenue in Watertown, and that was my great-grandfather.
Wow.
Because he had a big men's suit factory.
Okay.
It was sort of on a little hill. And then I was told that during World War II, they had the guns on the roof pointing up into the sky. And then he stopped making men's suits and he made army uniforms.
Oh, wow. Well, he deserves to have a street named after him then. Well, later on in our chat, I want to talk to you about theater, acting, entertainment, all the things you do, because you're a fascinating lady. Oh. But I do want to focus on The Whip, which I read and enjoyed. And no, it's not one of those 50 Shades of Grey. Nothing to do with that.
No.
The Whip is one of the most intriguing stories, and it's all based on a true story.
Yes.
But before we go into what it's all about, why? Why did you do this? You're so busy acting and starring in things. What prompted you to write a book about a certain kind of cowboy?
Yes. I was in my 20s, and I used to read Cosmopolitan magazine, How to Get a Man, and in it was an article about wild women of the West. And there was this great woman named Charlie Parkhurst. That's okay. That's okay. I sort of spoiled it.
Anyway, they're going to get the gist in a minute.
Anyway, but and I thought to myself, how could a woman? By the way, you should know that this book, since I've spoiled it already, is based on the true story of a woman who lived her life as a man in the Old West for 30 years. She was a stagecoach driver for Wells Fargo. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, how in God's name could, for 30 years, she was with all these macho men. How could she pee on the trail? How could she, and they all peed together.
Or
course,
disrobe, take off your shirt on a hot summer day.
Yes, or how could her period, And, I know when I was a girl, it was like, bouncing along on a stagecoach would not have been my favorite thing. How did she cover her body? All of these things. It fascinated me. For years I thought about it. And finally, I, some years later, decided I would sit down and try to novelize this story. Interesting story because it is true, and you say at the very beginning you did as much as you could to stay to the story, to be as factual as possible. Yes. In a novel, you have to obviously use your imagination a little bit as to conversation, but you did a lot of research. This was not something you just threw together. No, absolutely. Right. In fact, some of the words, I'd look up words in the dictionary to find out what year a word was used. For instance, the word okay. Yes, I read that, and it was a new term in the 1800s. Yes. Right. And I was so fascinated that it had possibly come from the Indians, because we use that word all the time and don't even think about it. But there's so many words like that there are words that they didn't use then. So I had to look very carefully at each word. Let's now explain the title. It's called The Whip. And the whip was the name of the occupation. What you did as a driver of a stagecoach was you were a whip, correct? That's exactly right. But what did that entail besides just driving? There's a lot more than that, right? Well, first of all, Charlie in particular, her name was Charlotte, but Charlie Parkhurst. What happened is Charlie drove a team of 6 horses, and each horse had its own rein. And so it was like playing the piano. I mean, you had to very carefully, manipulate each rein, and they were all wound into your fingers. It was a very difficult thing.
You described some. It's amazing. I mean, coming around those turns, I've driven the Pacific Coast Highway.
Oh my God! Yes.
It's great, and those windy roads. I always think of. Well, we'll talk about James Dean later. You made a movie about James Dean, but I think about those winding roads. But then I think about what it's like to be controlling a rickety old stagecoach.
That's right, and and also up mountains and down mountains.
Yep.
Across, there's that one at the beginning when crossing the river. That's true, by the way. That whole thing of going in the cross and then the whole bridge collapsing behind her.
Right.
And also, you had to be strong because you had to handle big boxes of gold or money. Those boxes were very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You just had to be a rough and ready person.
Because on the trail, there could be bandits, there could be bad guys, Indian, could be anything.
Yes.
That you're facing. Well, let's back up a little bit because here's a story that is so bizarre because it takes place in the 1800s, the 19th century. It starts off, though, in an orphanage on the East Coast, right?
Yes, in Boston.
In Boston. And you've got this little girl, tiny little girl, Charlotte, and you've got this slightly older boy. And this is where it all begins. And I was amazed that this gentleman, let's call him that, follows her throughout part of her life?
Yes, her whole
life. Okay, let's explain what happens at the beginning of Charlotte's life. She's a cute little girl, but she's an orphan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
She grew up in an orphanage.
With a nasty old biddy.
Well, I was trying not to make it too Dickens-esque.
Ooh, boy.
But, those orphanages were not the best place to grow up.
Right.
I mean, it was very tough. There wasn't a lot of money to keep the children well. And they brought in people that, were not, who after a while mistreated the children many times just to keep them under control. So orphanages were not the place to be.
Indeed. It's a very interesting relationship that occurs early on in the book. We're not going to give it all away, but there's an older boy, and he's sort of protective of this little, what is she, 3 or 4 years old?
Yes.
She's really tiny. And they sort of,
bonded.
That's when the, strangely enough, and I want to ask you about this, that's when the illusion of her posing as a boy begins?
Yeah,
I
tried to mirror things.
Okay.
Well, I did write a novel, which means that there needs to be an arc. There needs to be characters you root for and hate. And so, I created you mentioned it, a kind of James Dean little boy growing up into a man who follows her through her life and becomes the nemesis of her life, who actually protected her in the beginning. And without him, she probably wouldn't have, had any companionship.
Karen Kondazian is here. The brand new novel, The Whip, is getting raves, and it's a phenomenally exciting story because who doesn't love cowboys and stagecoach and horses and all that excitement? But it's really interesting that in that era, you had to cut the mustard and really be tough. How did she learn horses?
Well, there is the rumor, by the way, I found out a lot of research you should know by going to Watsonville, California, where she is buried in the Oddfellows Cemetery.
Makes sense. Woman posing as a man?
Yes, and the Oddfellows Cemetery, of course, was a charity, a men's charity group, which was very famous. And no women could belong, only men. And, of course, Charlie was one of the members. Anyway, I went and interviewed a lot of older folks there whose grandparents and great-grandparents apparently, or they had information about Charlie because she's the heroine of the city of Watsonville. And her middle name was Darky. Darky in those days was African-American. There were rumors about her that she had been with an African-American man. And so I took and made a love story out of all of that.
What about the fellow in the book who sort of gives her training, that wonderful older gentleman who helps her with horses? Because she has she sort of have a natural knack with horses.
Yes, and apparently there was a man like that in her life who taught her about horses.
Sort of a fatherly figure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And he was also African-American, black. Of course, they didn't call them African-Americans, black.
Now, this is interesting, too. She's in the East Coast in New England in an orphanage. She ends up being the greatest sort of cowgirl posing as a cowboy ever lived. And you're also born here, and you moved west. Some similarities there.
Oh my God, I never thought of that.
I just made an assumption. Of course, you look like a woman, believe me, in every way. But that was interesting that she had sort of that sort of feel for the horse. I mean, she sort of bonded with the horse.
Yes. You know, they're girls. There's lots of girls who right from the beginning of their lives have a thing for horses, and obviously she did, and. So I don't want to give the story away, but there was a reason, and she went from Boston by Clipper across Panama and got to California during the gold rush.
Interesting, too. I was thinking, how would you get to California if you didn't go by stage, and the railroads were still in their infancy?
Yes,
So you would have to go, you could go by boat. I didn't realize that.
Yes, the Clipper ship. Yes, right. And it was a huge journey, and sometimes, terrible accidents happened, and there were pirates and seasick, and people died on the way. It was a very difficult. It took her 3-4 months.
Now, it's one thing to dress like a man, but then to act like the man of the time, the macho cowboy, means you have to be able to slug back the whiskey.
Yes.
In her case, she smoked a lot of cigars.
Yes.
And she did take on the demeanor as sort of an actress to sort of fool everybody.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And it's interesting that you bring that up because she died of mouth cancer, tongue cancer,
the cigars.
From chewing tobacco.
Oh, and chewing tobacco.
And cigars and too much liquor. Mm-hmm. And the man that she voted for, she was apparently the first woman to vote in America as a man. General Grant died of the same thing.
In fact, just recently we had a historian join us who talked about Grant's last year in which he wrote probably the most prolific and wonderful memoir of any president, and he was also suffering with that same disease because he smoked 50 cigars a day or something like that.
And drank, probably.
Drank a lot, yeah. But she voted, that's interesting, she voted as Charlie,
yes,
a gentleman,
yes,
in, 1868?
1868, very good, yes.
Wow, it's just amazing. So, over the course of 30 years, I mean, you must have imagined this, how many times were there close calls when somebody might have suspected something and she was able to get by?
I took from the newspaper when she passed away. There were all these articles written about her. In fact, even the New York Times wrote an obituary. But there was all her old friends couldn't believe these guys, these very macho stagecoach drivers, could not believe that she had been a woman. I mean, she carried this off for 30 years, and she was not discovered until they got her ready for her funeral. And then all the doctors from everywhere came to check her out, and they saw that she had had a child. And, there were actual sentences from the newspaper that I copied of these drunken men sitting in the bar going, "Oh, my God,
I can't
Charlie was a woman. I camped out with her.
Yeah.
I slept on the same buffalo robe,
Right. Probably said a lot of things in front of her and around her.
Yes.
But the question, I have to ask it, is, and I don't know how much testimony there would be, I mean, was this person homosexual?
No, not that we know of.
Not that we know of, right?
No. I mean, she had had a child.
Right.
That they knew for sure. And I know that the first thing you think about is a tough old, a girl who maybe was a lesbian. But as far as we know, there was not that. She was a straight woman. Now, I'm going to say that in those days, there were many women who lived their lives as men. During during the Civil War, there were a couple of Confederate soldiers who were women.
Yes.
Dressed as women, never were discovered, and went home and had 3 children.
Right, because they wanted to serve.
If you were a free spirit, you had like 3 choices in life as a woman. You could be a mother, a prostitute, and if you had a little education, a teacher.
School marm, yeah.
And if you were really ugly, you could be a nurse out in the fields. They wanted only ugly women.
Karen, I think... the Annie Oakleys, the tough pistol-shooting gals. There were a few, Bellstar, there were a few of those, but they were women. I mean,
and you knew they were women.
But in this case, she pulled the rug over everybody.
She did. But I was just going to say that, this was a time when women could have no dreams. You were not allowed dreams. Only men could have dreams. And so the women that were free spirits, like me and a lot of women I know, would have put on breeches to see the world, to travel. I mean, to have a life as opposed to being put in one of two main categories. Most women, whether they liked it or not, ended up on a farm with 19 children. Well,
it's quite a few.
Quite a few children.
We're talking with the author of a brand new novel called The Whip. It's really interesting, inspired by the true story. Great reviews from other writers and me. And the author here, Karen Kondazian, is going to join us. And stay with us. We'll do another segment here because I want to talk to you about your own life, which is fascinating. You're a lady who's done it all. And we'll continue with Karen and the Old West and the New West right after this on The Jordan Rich Show. Welcome back, dear friends. This is Jordan, and joining me in this segment on The Jordan Rich Show is Karen Kondazian. That's Kondazian. Her book is called The Whip, inspired by a true story of Charlie Parkhurst. Charlie Parkhurst, a.k.a. Charlotte Parkhurst, was indeed a stagecoach driver, a whip. She posed as a man for 30 years until her death, and it's a legend of the Old West that is true, which is really cool. And Karen and I were talking about all the sort of dramatic moments that occur in her life that are just aching to be written about. So you've done a great job. I want to talk to you about your dramatic moments. May I?
Yes, please.
All right. Karen is an accomplished actress, and let me just go back to the bio here because I don't want to misquote. But according to your bio, first of all, Art Linkletter's Kids Say the Darndest Thing. You were one of the kids in that show?
I was.
Now,
I was.
He was... I loved him from afar. Was he a nice guy? Do you remember anything about that?
Yes. Well, I was 8 years old.
Okay.
So I wasn't a good, I didn't really know about people. But we were trained by one person. And then when we were ready to go on, 5 minutes before, we met Mr. Linkletter. And he was a very elegant, very nice man who, I could see in his eyes twinkling that he was still a child. I say in my book, that we're all children disguised as adults, which I really believe. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the thing is when I went on the show, I remember I wanted to be a spy. I had seen too many spy movies, I'm afraid. But all of a sudden I said on the air, I now want to be an actress. And he said, why? And I said, because I get to miss school. And you give me all the free grilled cheese sandwiches and orange sherbet before the show. I can eat everything I want. And if that's being an actress, that's what I want to do. So at 8 years old, I made that decision.
Wow.
And never wavered.
That's cool. And again, Karen's career, man, schooling at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts and the University of Vienna. I mean, you could have gone to, UMass Boston or UCLA. Well, that's pretty cool.
I was lucky
to begin theater and learning and all that kind of stuff. And now we get into some of your productions. Ed Harris, starring opposite him in Sweet Bird of Youth. Richard Chamberlain, Richard II. No big names here. Stacy Keach in Hamlet. My goodness, woman, you've had some fun with some of these great roles, huh?
And also, one of my favorites was playing Maria Callas in The Master Class.
I can see that. I can because you have that complexion. And do you sing, by the way? Are you?
No, but in Terence McNally's beautiful play,
yes.
She has lost her voice at this point, and it's 3 years before she dies, and she gives a master class at Juilliard. And it's a great play.
For someone to be involved in the theater arts, and I love theater, to have the opportunity to do it professionally is one thing. But then to work with giants and people that just give so much, like the people we mentioned. But here's one. How many people have I sat down with who have had a relationship and a friendship with Tennessee Williams?
Oh, yes.
How did that come about?
I was doing Rose Tattoo. I'm a member of the Actors Studio, and Lee Strasberg, I did a scene for him, and he said, you must do the Rose Tattoo. So I got some money that I had saved up, and I decided I would produce it, not knowing a thing about producing. I didn't even know you're supposed to get the rights to a play. Well, finally I did. And produced and starred in Rose Tattoo. And it won. I was very fortunate. I won the LA Drama Critics Circle Award, and Tennessee Williams happened to be in town. And a friend brought us as a surprise him to see me in the play. And what happened was he loved the production so much, and he loved my performance. We started to become friends. And he said to me, "Oh, darling, I'll give you the rights to any of my plays. Just call Billy Barnes, my agent." And so I was able to do. As long as he was alive, I could do any of his plays. So I did Sweet Bird with Ed Harris, and a play, West Coast premiere of a play called Vucare, which was wonderful. Ran a long time, and became addicted to Williams' plays. And I have to tell you a funny story. So when I first met Williams, I don't know why I had cleavage, and I was sitting across the table. Now, we know Mr. Williams was gay, but he kept staring at my cleavage, and we were finally introduced, and we both stood up, and he gave me a hug, and he said, "Darling," he said, "could I touch them?"
Really?
And I said, "Oh, sure." So he put his hands on my breast, and he said, "I'll take him gift wrapped." Well,
that's a good line.
That was the beginning of our friendship.
That's great. By the way, just as an aside, in high school, my first introduction to Tennessee Williams was in a one-act play called The Long Goodbye. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I do.
Now, I'm a sophomore in high school. I'm a real naive kid, and this was a pretty adult play. We were doing it in a competition. I played the Puerto Rican friend of the writer. I played Silva, the Puerto Rican friend. I was perfectly cast, because look at me, I could pass for Puerto Rican.
You could pass for Armenian, Italian.
I'll take it. But the fact is, God, was that a great play. Even in high school, we realized how awesome every line just kind of sang. It was just
Well, he was a poet at heart.
Yeah,
that was the point. And, he loved to, his plays are, he told me something interesting. He said, to do my work well, he said, you have to understand as a human being the struggle of the body, the carnal body, with the soul. And he said, that's what I've struggled with all my life. And he said, if actors don't understand that, because that's what all my characters are doing, he said, they can't play my work. They just act it then.
Do you think then, and I thought your book was very well written. I read 5 books a week. Believe me.
My God.
Not all novels, but I have to. But I must say it was exciting. It moved, and there was a lot of character, connection, pathos, call it what you will. Do you think that that the actor in you makes you a better writer?
I have this theory that actors, if they have the passion and the commitment, are really good actors, writers, because they have this sense of, when you're writing, you're improving. You're improving a conversation. And actors are really mostly very good at that. You also have to do backstory. You have to figure out, in the background of what happened to the character from their youth, as an actor, as a writer. So, and also you see visually,
Well, you're creating something for the benefit of others, a full-bodied figure with emotion, with fears, with hopes, dreams, love, etc. You're creating this from your imagination as an actor, or from the writer's imagination. It's a fascinating thing that we all do.
Well, something else is actors are. Lee Strasberg once said they're athletes of the emotion, and if that's true, and it is, then the emotion, the writer has to find a way to access that emotion in himself, and then to write on it. And so, for instance, like we have something called sense memory, actors have, where you hear a song and it brings up a feeling inside of you or an emotion.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's what a writer has to learn to do, and then you write on the emotion. I know that sounds peculiar.
No, I understand
but
completely.
You bring up the emotion and then you write from it.
Right.
And so that's why, yes, I'm answering your question. I think actors, writers, they're kind of the same thing.
My guest is actress, writer, and general all-purpose nice lady, Karen Kondazian. Her book is called The Whip. We'll get back to it in a minute. We talked about it in the first segment. before the break. Just a couple more notes here. Besides being a lifetime member of the Actors Studio, mucho impressed, and you're members of all the various academies and so forth. Television, we referred to the James Dean thing. I remember the TNT movie with James Franco, one of his first roles.
Yes.
Brilliant performance by him, and I love the film. And also, you've done 50-plus television shows.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I mean, you look so familiar. Frasier. I never missed a Frasier.
Yes. Well, the thing is probably one of the reasons is that I play a lot of Italian moms and Greek moms and psychics and gypsies.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I look like a gypsy. Yes, so that's what I've played a lot of those. But if I see another crystal ball, I mean, I have played those ladies. I could read your palm if you.
Well. I suppose typecasting, on television that happens more than it does in theater, right?
It does. You're absolutely right.
But you've got a great resume of work, and you are still a working actress, so you're still out there. But let's get back to the novel, because folks listening love to hear from authors. The novel is called The Whip, and again, it's the true story, inspired by the true story of Charlie Parkhurst, who was really Charlotte. And you were touching on some themes in this book, because it takes place 150 years ago, but it's still relevant today. How so?
Well, the river that runs through the book, I like to say, is a question that I'm going to ask you and the listeners. And that question is, what would happen if someone destroyed everybody and everything in your life horribly? Your children, your grandchildren, your husband, your wife, everything. Could you forgive them? And if you couldn't, how far would you go? And that's really, the theme of the book. It's revenge, forgiveness. It's kind of a female Unforgiven, if you remember that.
Of course I do, yes.
Movie.
I do indeed. And that's an issue that you could place characters in any time period.
Yes.
Because it's universal.
In fact, I'm being Armenian. We had a genocide, and you could ask any Armenian. It's in their genes to, whether you're Jewish, Armenian, it doesn't matter. It's in your genes. Can you forgive? It's very hard.
It's very hard, particularly when the person or persons who you want to forgive are so unrelenting in some cases. You're hoping in real life, oh, please, just give a little bit so I can forgive you.
Yes, that's right.
It's a really difficult thing. And the beauty of forgiveness is when not only are you doing the forgiving, but maybe that other person catches the vibe.
Do you remember the doctor in Connecticut whose two children and wife were raped and burned to death? Okay,
yeah, local story.
And once they were finally, they're going to be executed, but they asked him. They said, "Now that they're going to be executed, can you forgive? Can you forgive?" And he said, "I cannot forgive evil."
I'll give you another example, though, on the flip side, and this may not have made news out where you are most of the time. There was a little girl, 4 or 5 years old at the time, who was struck by a stray bullet in Mattapan or Dorchester section of Boston and paralyzed, basically from the waist or upper chest down. Many years later, and I apologize, listeners, for not knowing the name, it had made front page news here. She took the stand to testify against this gang and gang leader who apparently was allegedly the shooter. And she actually got up there, and this 8-year-old child forgave her assailant.
Oh, my God.
And it was one of those things that it was talked about on talk shows for days, weeks, because it was so breathtakingly odd for someone in our society who's always willing to pounce for this little girl to forgive. And say what you will, I mean, it takes a lot to do that, to shed that. And I don't blame the doctor either for saying what he said. So
yes.
It's weird. I mean, you don't know till you're in that situation.
I know. My character has to go through that dilemma.
Yes.
And throughout the whole book, it's that choice. Is it revenge? Is it forgiveness?
There's also another theme that I'd like to explore with you for a minute before we wrap up, and that is identity, who we really are. And in this era of the 19th century, obviously you have to really watch your P's and Q's because you can be really roughed up. But even today, there are people who, and I'm not talking about sexual identity necessarily, I'm just talking about, being who they are in their own skin, being comfortable, or putting on
a mask.
A mask.
Yes, my book is, boy, you caught that. Each of the characters is wearing a mask of some kind. Is, the old saying about you can't tell a book by its cover. And I believe that we all carry secrets, and we hide the beautiful part of ourselves, many of us, from even the people we love, because of all of our reasoning. But, the book is again, it's that thing of what happens when you rip away the mask. What's underneath? We're so afraid that we're not enough,
Right. This is the only sort of silly question, maybe it's not silly, that I thought of reading this whole thing. This woman poses as a tough, grizzled, very capable whip or stagecoach driver. The one thing I don't think most women have is a beard.
No.
And the guys in the Old West, scruffy, sitting around the campfire. That was the only thing that got me. I said, wouldn't somebody have said, I don't think I've ever seen her shave.
Yes.
Or him shave.
Yes. You know what? I realized that's why I have her dirty a lot.
Yes.
Is I have the feeling that every part of her costume was to put dirt on her face. And they were filthy.
Yeah.
So you really couldn't see the face very much. I mean, you're sitting on a stagecoach 8 hours with dust and mud flying in your face.
Let's put it this way. The 1939 John Ford classic Stagecoach with John Wayne, which is a great movie.
Yes.
They don't really look like that. They were messy and grimy and probably smelled to high heaven.
That's exactly. Probably took a bath, if once a month.
Yes. And not the cleanest water, probably.
That's exactly.
Well, do you have a website that you'd like to promote with this?
Actually, there is. It's www.thewhipnovel.com. So it's WHIPNOVEL, thewhipnovel.com. And, of course, you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, that kind of thing.
And I'm telling you, when it was pitched to me, I take a lot of great pictures, and I said, this sounds really kind of interesting. And I didn't think it would be as captivatingly written because it really does move along very, very well. Some might think, well, there's one hook here, but no, there's about 15.
There are lots of secrets in the book.
And I congratulate you on that, all your awards in acting, and I wish you the best. And, hey, you got to get over to the Armenian Museum in Watertown, which is tremendous. They've done a great job over there. It's a brand-new building.
I'm looking forward to it, and I love this interview.
Well, thank you.
You're very special.
Well, I'm glad we're now friends, and I highly recommend your book, The Whip, and I want you to seek out Karen Kondazian. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. We will continue. We always continue right after this on The Jordan Rich Show.